Hello, this is Phoenix and
This is Aria.
And we're sat in a park on the hem of Eastern Europe. It's sunny, there's a soft breeze, there's a stream nearby. It's very calm.
We're sitting in a field of daisies.
We're recording this because we'd like to talk about the post-capitalist, surrealist fantasy land that everyone's living in, and maybe try and make some sense of this and compare the situation we're in now to the experiences that we had as children, being abused within the same social system, which appears now to be slowly collapsing. When I was a kid at school, I was aware, because of the experiences I was going through and other children were going through, that the teachers at the school were sexually abusing the children. And exactly the same situation seems to be playing itself out now in our society. So we've discovered this week, for those of us who weren't definitive on it before, that Bill Clinton definitively is a paedophile. We've also discovered that Bill Gates, who's obviously leading this surrealist fantasy landscape that you're existing in, with the masked army leering at you from every corner, demanding that you wear their religious dress code. So more Epstein-related documents have been released in relation to Ghislaine Maxwell. So if you've been following this story, then you'll know that Ghislaine Maxwell was a close accomplice of Epstein, and she has been sort of roaming free these last few months and no one's been arresting her, and it's been kind of curious, why has that happened? Now she has been arrested. Bill Gates, who said he was only a remote acquaintance of Epstein, despite giving him $2 million and being obviously frequently seen together with him, visited Epstein's house numerous times for weeks. So we now have a situation where perhaps one of the most prominent political figures of recent time, someone who's also cheerleading the masked army, and Bill Gates, who more or less engineered the situation we find ourselves in and seems to have patented numerous vaccines and things, who's also been cheerleading the masked army. Both these people are paedophiles. So this reminds me exactly of how it was at school. So I was aware that the teachers at the school were raping children. However, there are enough children who weren't being abused, and there are enough parents who were denying the abuse, that the school could get away with it. And so I feel what was happening to me as a kid at my school, King's House School in Richmond, London, was a microcosm of what's now going on in our society, as in there's a certain number of us, probably you, as a result of you listening to this podcast and also reading and also thinking for yourself and questioning authority. There's a large number of us, including you listening to this podcast, who realise that this masked army and this whole virus fantasy has been concocted in order to divide and rule. And it's a very, very strange situation for us now to be in. We see here and there the remnants of the masked army demanding that we wear their religious dress, demanding that we don't enter their property unless we're wearing their religious dress, getting angry at us for not kowtowing to the state, malevolent, crooked paedophiles. And so it feels to me like the challenge that I faced in school, which was to survive that experience of being abused and then to speak out against it, is now it's reached a point where it's gone through the Me Too movement, whether you agreed wholeheartedly with that phenomenon or not, but basically people speaking out about abuse. And then later we began to confront abuse in larger systems like movie studios. And then now we're confronting the sexual abuse of children in our political systems. So it feels slowly we're going up the chain of command. Individual abuse, abuse in institutions, and now abuse in government. And I think what's slowly dawning on people is that government does not sustain itself naturally. In order for someone to rule over you, and in order for you to live in fear of their commandments, they must at some point have abused such a large swathe of the population that you kowtow to their demands.
Yeah, absolutely. This also mirrors what happened to me as a kid, especially what Phoenix was saying there about people don't willingly submit to orders. In order to get someone to comply with someone else, basically become subservient, become like a slave to the government, they basically need to have been severely abused and systematically abused. It helps me to understand why people have this reaction, and it doesn't make me less angry at people for being so blind and feeling like sheep. I feel more and more free, and I'm more and more able to speak out about these abuses that are happening now, and also not participate in these systems that hurt me so much as a child.
I feel it's sociologically very interesting now because We could only speculate in the past the number of people who had been physically and sexually and emotionally abused as children. But now we have a very strong visual barometer of exactly how many people were sexually and physically and mentally abused as children, because they are those who are wearing the masks. Because if you remembered your abuse, you would remember that exactly the same impositions that are being placed on us by the alleged government, which is actually just a paedophile mafia, would seem ridiculous. You would have your own self-sovereignty. Additionally, if you weren't abused as a child, then the whole thing would seem like a peculiar surrealist fantasy to you. And I'm sure many people do feel that it's a peculiar surrealist fantasy. I'll give you some examples of this. So the other day I went to buy a desk. I bought this desk off eBay, and when I turned up at the person's house, the person selling the desk was a famous German newscaster. She opened the door to her house. She shook my hand heartily. She observed none of the perverse, made up, strange parlor game type rules of this alleged social distancing, which is actually anti-social distancing, isn't it? She said to me, look, I'm sorry if you see me on the news. I don't believe anything that I'm saying, but I'm trying to change the system from within. So we have this state of being now on the planet, which Adam Curtis, the documentary maker, called hypernormalization. And hypernormalization is essentially where most people know that the state has collapsed, that the state has reached such a point of ridiculousness that it no longer has any authority. However, everyone's a bit unsure about whether they're allowed to say it and what happens next. So when you have a situation where the newscaster, who a few hours before is telling everyone to panic about a fantasy virus, and then hours later ushering relative strangers into our house, shaking their hands heartily and telling them that they don't believe anything they say on television, you have really reached a state of hypernormalization. So I began to regard this situation as quite amusing. Another interesting observation: I was thrown out of a bookshop a few months ago for refusing to wear the mouth swastika, and the member of staff in the bookshop who threw me out wasn't wearing a mask. Now, I glanced in the bookshop the other day, and now it's the opposite case. So it used to be that if you were a member of the public and you went into the bookshop, you had to wear a mouth swastika. Now it's switched. Now, if you're a staff member, you have to wear a mouth swastika, and if you're a member of the public, you don't. So it's very curious. They keep switching the rules, and they keep turning the oppressor into the oppressed, and vice versa. So those very same people who demanded I wear a muzzle, they're forced to wear a muzzle because they didn't speak out when I was forced. There's a kind of strange karmic leveling going on, I think. It's interesting to see the narrative dissolve, because I've noticed that people have stopped giving me facts and information that they think defends the masks, and they've started lapsing into complete fantasy. For example, I said to someone who was part of the masked army the other day, I said, do you think it's strange in the past, like throughout your life, whenever you've gone to the doctor during flu season or around winter, that the doctor is not wearing a face mask? If we could stop viral particles with face masks, wouldn't the doctor be wearing a face mask during flu season every year to stop the patients transmitting flu to them? And this guy, this member of the masked army, he said to me, actually, every time I've been to the doctor in the winter, he's been wearing a mask, or she's been wearing a mask. I mean, I don't know how to counter that. It's gone beyond. I hope I'm expressing that correctly. What I'm trying to say is, it's gone beyond any rational justification. It's got to the point where the masked army is literally rewriting past reality. People are telling you, actually, it's almost got to the point where you might say, why are you wearing a mask? And they will say, we've always worn masks every winter throughout time. I mean, how deep does the denial go? I think as the logic of it becomes more and more preposterous, the lies and fantasy constructs that are required to sustain this strange masquerade become more and more, well, entertaining, actually. I'm enjoying it. The virus is very clever. So if you are part of, just to clarify, Black Lives Matter, the philosophy, I'm completely behind. I do think Black Lives Matter, as I think white lives matter. And to go further beyond that, as I believe all lives matter, because I don't really believe melanin density means anything. We all have different levels of melanin in our skin. I have a love globally for humanity, regardless of how much melanin you have in your skin. However, the protest group appears to be heavily aligned with a group called Antifa. And I know, having run into conflicts with Antifa in Berlin, that Antifa are not anti-fascist. Antifa are fascists. by the very definition of fascist. And fascist, I don't mean it as an insult, I mean it in its truest meaning, which is in ancient Rome, the fasci were weapons carried by the bodyguards of the Roman elite and aristocratic classes. And the fasci was a bundle of sticks tied together with an axe put in the end. And metaphorically, it also represented who the bodyguards were. They were stick-like or weak-minded people bound together and then given a weapon. And it feels like Antifa is fascist. It claims to be anti-fascist, but it's actually fascist because it is a weak-minded group of people given an axe. And the axe is the grievance of the establishment that will divide us. So the emphasis that's suddenly being placed on melanin density as being the most concerning issue of our time and being one that we should rally against, and particularly this idea that somehow people with less melanin density are the problem. It doesn't feel like the solution to a melanin density war is for those who were oppressed before in the melanin density war to just reverse their position, to then attempt to oppress the other group, because this only serves the purpose of the elite. It doesn't serve our purpose, because if you attack each other, you don't look up. So the entire purpose, in my view, of Antifa is to create division so that we fight each other, so that we look across at each other in fear instead of looking up at those who are manipulating the situation.
I totally agree with Phoenix, and to make it clear as well that I also believe that all lives matter, and I feel like people who went on those protests for Black Lives Matter had good intentions. The problem that I have with it is that it's so clearly being led by the government, by this cult, by this agenda. You see the focus of the media goes, suddenly it's all Black Lives Matter, and this phrase and this terminology, it's clearly a marketing campaign, like Phoenix was saying.
Black Lives Matter, social distancing, flatten the curve. Yeah. Why does everyone sing all these phrases in unison? I think we're beginning to understand why all these phrases are sung in unison, and that's because people like Bill Gates and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation part-own the BBC. They part-own the Guardian newspaper. One of the people who's profited most from this alleged virus is Jeff Bezos, head of Amazon. Strange, he owns the Washington Post. The guy who oversees the New York Times, Mark Thompson, he oversaw the BBC whilst they were covering up Jimmy Savile's paedophilia. So we're in a very curious situation. We're in a situation which was similar to the situation I faced at school, and probably sounds like many of you listening probably faced at school, where you know that those who say they are in charge, the teachers, you could call them, the politicians who are basically teachers, or they take on that role in the larger school of the world, they're corrupt, they're paedophiles. And so we have a situation where they're terrified of you waking up to that. They're terrified that more of us will wake up to that. And so they stir up conflict in our societies so that we don't look up. For example, I feel like one of the most important pieces of information that the public should be aware of is that Bill Gates is a paedophile. Yeah. And then secondarily, that Bill Clinton is a paedophile. And yet we have a situation where these pieces of information are completely excluded from the news, and what is emphasized is Black Lives Matter, social distancing, flatten the curve. Isn't it slightly more important that Prince Andrew, for example, who is part of the richest family on earth, who own 1/6 of the earth's surface, Bill Gates, who is the richest man on earth, the royal family and Bill Gates, who together represent the richest group on earth, they are paedophiles. Is this not slightly more important than how much melanin you have in your skin?
I see it as very positive now that these things are really coming to the surface, becoming uncovered in the mainstream as well. You know, I mean, even The Guardian is reporting on it. Of course, under that's important to note as well. The language that is used surrounding it, instead of saying like notorious paedophile Jeffrey Epstein rapes children, they say forced to have sex with underage girls. And, well, you can see their alignment there, The Guardian, with a headline like that.
If you look carefully, very carefully at the language the media are using to describe, for example, what Prince Andrew has done, you will see that they are aligned with that power structure. For example, with Prince Andrew, they say that he had sex with underage girls. That's not what happened. He raped children. Yes. And the media, at least the dinosaur legacy media, like the BBC, CNN, MSNBC, these dinosaur media outlets, they are cushioning what these men and women have done to children in order that you do not focus on that and you focus elsewhere. Their message is, don't look here. Don't look at your paedophile politicians. Don't look at the head, the largest funder of the World Health Organization, who claims there's a virus, Bill Gates, who is a paedophile. Don't look here, look there. Look how much melanin you have in your skin. Look at your shop windows being smashed. Get scared, divide yourself against each other, because whilst you stay divided against us, you won't attack us, you won't dethrone us. The entire objective of this, thankfully now collapsing virus fantasy, was to distract you from the royal family, Bill Gates, Bill Clinton, Epstein, and others who have been systematically, on a huge scale, raping the children on this planet.
This is not something new. Other people have spoken out about this presidential rape. I mean, it's not something that hasn't been spoken out about before. Now, positive, very positive, it seems like a turning point is happening where there's so much coming to the surface that it's basically becoming impossible now for these people to deny it and to hide from it. And it's coming out in mainstream sources. I see it as very positive, really. It feels like this stage at the moment is really the crisis stage for this falling empire.
Yeah, it's getting more and more absurd and unsustainable. For example, the other day in Berlin, over 1 million people marched against the government because of all these strange, made-up, nonsensical rules that they keep enforcing on people. Like the idea that you have to wear a mask to go into shops is completely unbacked up by science. I mean, for example, take a look at this short clip here, where a guy is reading people in a grocery store in America the warning on the side of the box for the masks. And the warning says, this mask will not protect you against any virus. Okay, so that's actually on the box for the mask. And he's asking people in the shop if they're aware of this.
It's there to protect you from COVID-19, is that the deal?
Supposedly, yeah.
Okay. Do you know that, have you read the outside of the box here? That's the outside of the box of the very mask you're wearing right there. Look at the outside of the box for the very mask you have. Look, it says, will not provide any protection against COVID-19. This is the box for the mask that you have.
So it's reached a point where the boxes of the masks that they're selling you tell you that the mask will do nothing, and yet the government is forcing you to wear it. At that point, I think we can say we've gone full hypernormalization. We've completely drifted into Wonderland. It's slipped off the table of reality and into some bizarre post-capitalist surrealist fantasy land, which Salvador Dali would delight in. I'm beginning to delight in it because it's very interesting to see how it cannot sustain itself. This march the other day in Berlin, where 1 million people and more stood up to these paedophile politicians and demanded that they stop imposing their strange religious beliefs on us. That was reported in the media, the dinosaur media, the legacy media, as being 16,000 people. And you can see from the photographs, it's nothing like that. And they also said that it was neo-Nazis, that it was the far right. And you look at the photos, they're all waving rainbow flags and dancing. It's got to the point where if you oppose the government, who are essentially Nazis in the truest sense, as in National Socialists, they're aligned with the interests of the wealthy industrialists. If you oppose the government, you're a Nazi. And then Antifa, who is a military wing of the government, will then be sent to attack you. So it's gone completely upside down. If you oppose dictatorship, you're called a Nazi. I mean, it's really fascinating. In fact, I said to a member of the masked army the other day, I said to him, do you know in Belarus, everything's just carrying on as normal? And he said, yeah, but in Belarus, they have a dictator. I mean, that's blown my mind. So if your country's leader doesn't impose rules on you, they are a dictator. It's gone completely upside down. So in Germany, where your paedophile leaders tell you must wear their religious garment, their little pedo mask, that is thought to be a democracy. But in Belarus, where you're allowed to wear what you want and your movement isn't restricted and you're allowed to make your own decisions about your life, that is being run, apparently, according to the masked army, by a dictator. So it's actually, for me, become a fascinating study in denial, a fascinating study in hysteria, a fascinating study in mass hypocrisy, a fascinating study in what happens when an empire of paedophiles and criminals and thieves and robbers and industrialists who have dominated our society for so long are being torn apart in the face of reality. Just wanted to finish off by saying that if you're viewing this video on YouTube, you should be aware that YouTube has fallen, as in YouTube represents the masked army. The problem with YouTube is that it's run by those in Silicon Valley, many of whom are deeply connected with paedophilia. I'm not saying everyone at YouTube is, but such a large number. If you're looking to YouTube for news, it's not representing actually what's happening. It's a propaganda arm of the state. There are some videos that creep through, and this video may stay up for a while. It depends. If it gets popular, as in anyone's video who speaks out against the state, if it becomes popular, they will censor it. They'll delete it. So you're only seeing on YouTube in your feed, you're only seeing things that are either in compliance with the state or question it so ineffectively that they haven't become popular yet. So if you do want to get a true sense of what's going on in the world, suggest that you go to an alternative platform. There are several of them. The one that we're using most at the moment is BitChute. And so you can find us on BitChute.
And BitChute seems to be good. Lbrary, I guess we'll see how it unfolds. I mean, there's worry in me that the same thing will happen to these other platforms at some stage, but at the moment it seems like there's much more freedom on these other platforms.
You'll definitely get a much better picture of what's going on in BitChute. We don't know what the future holds for BitChute, because probably eventually some massive conglomerate like Bill Gates is sort of got endless amounts of money because he's constantly raping children and reaping the benefits of his global tyranny. He will obviously, and others, attempt to buy these platforms, but they might have enough integrity not to be sold. However, for the moment, BitChute's a good place to go to get information. We endorse that for now. You might find when you arrive there that you're a little concerned by some of the comments on the channels because of the fact it's not censored. It is a bit maybe shocking to discover people have different views from you. Also, there's the phenomenon of those who would like you to believe that alternative platforms like BitChute are racist or have Nazi sympathies. There are groups who are paid to go onto these channels and to specifically write anti-Semitic comments in order that when you go on these alternative media platforms, you think, oh my God, everyone here is an anti-Semite. That's not the case. What is happening is that the legacy dinosaur media are doing everything in their power to undermine these alternative platforms and to label them as being extremist. But I think most of you are probably highly intelligent, and you'll be able to go on there and enjoy the content of some of the videos and make your own decision about what you want to watch and what you don't want to watch. Many of the people who you already enjoy on YouTube are migrating there, and there's some really, really strong voices. There's some really good people on there. Obviously, it's a bit of a wild west, so you're going to have to make your own decision. It's not curated for you. You are going to be your own guide in terms of what it is you want to consume and what you don't. Benefit of that is that there's not censorship, so you can find the truth. The negative aspect of it is that it's not going to be the sort of glossy ride that you get with YouTube. However, you're also not going to get a shitload of advertising fired at you. So in a way, YouTube has basically brought you to a point where we have this global panic, this global hysteria over a fantasy story concocted by paedophiles in order to distract you from what they're doing to children. So I feel like you could level any critique at BitChute, and it hasn't done that to us yet. There's also, like Aria said, there's Lbrary. There's a whole bunch of others. Take your pick. But our advice right now is, if you want to really understand what's going on this planet and you are mainly on YouTube, then you are within a walled garden which will never allow admittance to anyone who speaks the truth. And that's the most interesting thing about this alleged virus for me. This virus, this deadly virus, is so deadly that if you critique it or you question it on YouTube, then you must be censored. That's how strong that virus is, that it can't withstand any critique. And if you do critique it, you're excluded from the conversation. That's how deadly it is. I mean, what a bizarre idea. If a virus is deadly, you would know it.
What I find the most shocking, and there was I was watching this interview with Sonia Poulton and another speaker who was talking about the implications of this whole supposed pandemic on laws within the UK, and they were saying that it's comparable to the Second World War and what Hitler was doing in Germany, taking away civil liberties. It's comparable to that, which I found really shocking. They were saying you can basically close someone's business just on a whim, don't even need a good reason.
Maybe I'll leave you with a quote from the president of Belarus, and he said, "Better to die on your feet than live on your knees." And that's how I feel about this. I feel like I'll make my own choice. I won't have my life decided on by paedophiles. For me, as always, as I've lived throughout my life, throughout my time at school being abused by these same people who thought they had control over me, who are actually paedophiles. And as I'm living now in the school system, I guess, of these paedophile politicians, for me and hopefully for many of you, better to die on my feet than to live on my knees.